sideways looks like a Christmas tree.
It does look like a Christmas tree. We're getting ready for, as I was talking to one of the other coworkers today, or the other day, and they were like, I'm so excited, and they're planning all these decorations. I'm like, are you going to take them down? Because I'm the only one that took down the last holidays decorations, and I'm going to be the one taking down the fall decorations.
You're not going to have to take anything down, because I am going to straight up Grinch style come into the building, take everything and throw it in the trash.
They're like, as soon as Thanksgiving, I said, listen, we always pull the Christmas tree out at our library prior to Christmas.
I hate it. I hate every second of it.
I do that though, because that is the day we are most staffed, is the day before Thanksgiving. There's a logic behind my
So it feels wrong.
And that'll be like probably the only decoration I actually get out that day, because it's an all day affair. Decorations that are planned for our library are from this coworker a little intense. I'm like, I'll just cut out snowflakes as per usual, and that's will be my contribution.
This coworker is literally straight up real life time traveler version of Buddy the Elf. Like, I just like smiling. Smiling's my favorite. Buddy the Elf, what's your favorite color? Gosh, that's nice. Wow, the best cup of coffee. You did it. And I am like the Grinch, but with like arson tendencies. Like, I'm ready to burn this entire holiday to the ground, and it hasn't even begun yet.
Can I also mention, since we were just talking about Thanksgiving movies last episode, I forgot we're back. And it has the best Thanksgiving parade scene, I would argue, in any like Thanksgiving movie. Such a catchy song. It's also spooky, like very heavily spooky for a kid's animated movie.
Somewhat of a creature feature.
Somewhat of a creature feature. Walter Cronkite, John Goodman.
God, I love John Goodman.
Yeah. Big Lebowski.
We also recently, there's a meme going around that someone shared that's just a picture of Mike and Sully from Monsters, Inc. And they're like, this is what I imagine every podcast host looks like. And I decided that I am Sully and Beth is Mike.
Yes.
I feel like my logic tracks, and that's mostly just because Beth is more prone to like, put that thing back where it came from. Get me out of here. I don't want to deal with this. Like, somebody else's problem. Call the authorities. And I am much more like, no, but Daddy, I love him. We have to keep this evil creature that's going to kill everyone we love. As evidenced by when I like rescue a snake from the bathroom and Beth is already texting like everyone who needs to know there was a snake in the bathroom. And I'm just like, I have to put him somewhere the birds won't eat him.
Yes. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that as an aside. I was a little devastated after I thought about it, and it took me a good week and a half, and I went, dang it! Yeah, and in the time we've been away from each other, so much has happened. I got a haircut. I lost 5 pounds via stomach flu.
I had 5 Menti bees.
Yes. It's been a while since we've been back on this couch, so this bodes well for today. So welcome back.
I'm just going to keep pressing my nose into the microphone.
Welcome back to the Lake Erie Library. I am Beth.
And I'm here. No, I'm Britta.
And today we are doing our little book club. And we are discussing The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And we do have a new format for our little book talks, book club. We gotta come up with like a fun name for it. We will eventually.
Yeah.
Erie Book Club.
Yikes. Can you feel the 2 weeks we've been away? I can. Like a rusty door hinge.
It'll be fine.
It's all right. This has half a bottle of wine in it. We'll get there.
So anyhow, we will be discussing that book today. So if you have not read this book, and you're afraid for some mini spoilers, stop listening now.
Hold on.
God.
I don't even know if that came through, but that's my brewmate wine cup. Sorry. Just going to leave that open.
So if you haven't read it, like, we apologize for the spoilers. If you have read it and you want to comment or anything like that and talk about it in our social media, let us know. Otherwise, we will proceed and start. I don't think we really talked about the format. Britta knows it.
We sure didn't, Beth.
But
well, before we get into that, I do think we chose this book namely because we had both read it, and then also because Stephen Graham Jones is a Native American author, and we were like, hey, it's November. What better time to read this book?
Right. Native Heritage Indigenous Month. So
yeah,
Indigenous Month.
So in the spirit of that, also before I start drinking wine, because that feels a little disrespectful to do it after, I thought that we should maybe acknowledge the people who lived in Ohio. So I wrote a little land acknowledgement for our podcast. So in recognizing the land upon which we reside, we express our gratitude and appreciation to those who lived and worked here before us, those whose stewardship and resilient spirit make our residence possible on this traditional homeland of the Erie, Lenape, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Shawnee, Wyandotte, Kickapoo, Miami, Chippewa, Ottawa, Seneca, Tuscarora, and Cherokee peoples. We also acknowledge the thousands of Native Americans who call Northeast Ohio home today.
That was nice.
I tried. And also, if you wonder why you can't pronounce anything in Ohio, it's because it's the white people bastardization of Native American words and peoples.
Yes. Yes, very much so. But if you are interested in Native American heritage, like, you should definitely check out Ohio is home to... It's considered one of the newer wonders of the world, but we're home to one of the largest burial effigies for Native American peoples, the Great Serpent Mound. So it's definitely something to check out. It's in more southern Ohio, but it is free to go to. And they are still not quite sure. Like, with these mounds, they still are, like, learning things about them. They're not quite sure, like, the purpose of them and stuff like that. They have theories. But we're pretty unique in having, like, it's definitely like you can see aerially, it's definitely a mound, and it's shaped like a serpent with like an egg, and it's pretty neat. So if you, it feels very disrespectful to say, but it's like neat as in the word, like, it's really cool that we have that.
Yeah, it's
in
interesting.
Ohio.
Beth, I feel like so close to a city that had a Major League Baseball team named the Indians that barely dipped your toe into, like, disrespectful. So I think you're okay. Thank God they finally changed it. It's the Guardians now.
Yes. So yeah, anyways, we will be discussing this book, and we will try not to majorly plot spoil anything for you. I think I will do one trigger warning, because in this book there is multiple scenes of graphic kind of animal death, including dogs. So if you looked it up on Does the Dog Die? Yes, there's multiple dog things. And if that's not your jam, I guess don't read this book, as it very much stuff that happens, bad things that happen. And there's also just animal death in general. And I'm triggering you now. I'm letting you know now. So we will probably briefly mention those. I know neither of us, that's like a big no for both of us. So
yeah. The one is like, plan on discussing it a little bit, just because it, like, there's a specific reason why it bothers me so much. But yeah, rather than giving you like a beat by beat synopsis like we've been doing, this time we were going to focus a little more on just like the elements of the book and the story. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the format of the book, the characters, what we think worked, what didn't, what particularly scared us or struck us, why we think you should read this book or why it's important. And then I always I always like to find the little like word nuggets, as I call them, like pieces of the story or writing that really like hit me because of the way they were written. So I have a little section I called word candy. We don't have to call it that. I just needed something to break up the sections in my notes. So I forgot. I had read this a while ago, so I was trying to do a little refresher, and I forgot that so much of the plot happens around Thanksgiving.
Yes. Basic plot synopsis would be there are 4 Blackfeet Indian friends. I will refer to them as Indians only because that's what...
I think that's okay. That's what they call themselves in the story, and that's also the description on the inside of the book jacket. So I am assuming that Stephen Graham Jones is okay with that nomenclature.
So there are 4 friends, and the story takes place in like kind of two sections. There's the before, where they had a hunting trip about 10 years prior to what is currently happening in the book, and they call it the wink wink nod nod, the Thanksgiving classic. And essentially this is a hunting trip that goes not well. It goes a little wrong.
I would argue that it goes very well.
Well, if you're a hunter, yeah, sure, it goes very well, but it goes against kind of their principles and values. In turn, 10 years later, this is a bit of a revenge story, so there is something picking them off kind of one by one, and you meet all of them 10 years later, and none of them are really having a good time as kind of going from teenagers who participated in this hunt for this elk hunt to being adults and kind of going their separate ways. So yeah, that is the main, I would say, the gist of the story.
The spoiler-free summary.
Very spoiler-free summary.
Yeah, so it's I mean, should we talk about where the only good Indians comes from?
I think we should. That I know that was not his original title that he chose, but he ended up like landing on that one and was like, this is okay. But yeah, we can talk about the quote of where it comes from because it's kind of a messed up quote.
I mean, let's be honest. It's America. I feel like most things having to do with the indigenous people here are going to be pretty messed up.
Yeah.
We have not been kind to them.
No. So Stephen Graham Jones, this was probably his first big breakout book. He has written lots of short stories. He has written several books since. Many of his books have Native American characters and main characters in them. So if you were looking for story, and they're more, I would call him a modern horror author. Like he doesn't usually he writes about kind of the modern plight and like what Native Americans go through today. So you're not going to get what I would call stereotypical. What if you're a white person, you're not going to get that like historical. You're going to get, this is what we have dealt with as like generationally. And reading kind of reviews from Goodreads and other Reddit, which I was like, why am I on here? This is terrible. This turns off a lot of people, but I also feel like I think people are rude. I think you have to also, Stephen Graham Jones has a very particular way of writing where it feels a little stream of consciousness-y, and it's not Stephen King. It's not, he has a very distinctive style of writing. His characters to me talk how I would expect like a regular person to talk.
I was going to say in my notes like later, that's one of the things I really enjoy about reading his books is that I relate to that sort of like, stream of consciousness is a pretty good way to describe it. Like storytelling, it really does feel like how you think in your brain, as opposed to like a polished, I'm writing a novel, I'm writing literature type prose. Yeah, he's really good with dialogue. He does write the way people speak, and it's really noticeable in this book when he shows them like talking to each other, the friends,
right? Because
they speak differently to people outside of the reservation than they do when they speak to each other, which that is I mean, that is a cultural thing.
Right.
And I mean, you can't read this book or discuss this book without getting into the cultural aspect of it, because it is such a huge part of the story. But that is, I mean, I follow a lot of like Native and Indigenous content creators.
Mm-hmm.
While Beth is a science nerd, I am like a anthropology nerd. I'm very interested in cultures and peoples and languages. So I have noticed that watching, and a lot of them will make content. I'm thinking of one girl in particular where she always will contrast like life off the res sounds like this, life on the res sounds like this, and she'll tell you like the same thing but in two very different ways with totally different intonation and word usage and familiarity. So he does a very good job of writing dialogue like that. But now that we've like completely gone away from what we were looking up, we're gonna circle back. And it's, the full quote is literally, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And this has been attributed to General Sheridan, but I guess both he and his brother both like denied him ever saying it. So I don't know what's true. I mean, it's believable when you know the history of what happened in this country. But I think that's interesting though, because obviously that's not the point Stephen Graham Jones is trying to make.
No.
But all of his characters are sort of questioning at some point, like, what does it mean to be a good Indian?
Right. And so that's a good way to kind of dive in, I think, as like to start. So you have the four characters. You have Ricky, you have Lewis, you have Gabe, and you have Cass, and they all are Blackfeet Indians that grew up on this reservation. I think it's in Montana. Don't quote me on that.
I'm not sure.
But they all grew up on this reservation, and they have since then like moved. Most of them have, well, two of them moved away. The other two still live there. And the book does start with like one of them kind of being killed very much right away.
Yeah, which, if we're going to talk about things that scared us,
yeah,
I mean, this does start with a very short chapter. I mean, I don't know how to talk about it without spoiling some of it.
Yeah. Well, we're lightly spoiling it.
Yeah,
so it's okay.
I also feel like it's the inciting incident. So maybe if you like Googled this, it would probably tell you this information anyway.
Right. This would be like the cold open of a horror movie.
But yeah, so Ricky, it starts with Ricky, and this is close to the time that the original hunt happened. It's not 10 years later like the rest of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But he has sort of very quickly left the reservation after sort of a tragedy in his family. And his goal was to get to Minneapolis. And along the way, he found like pretty quick work in a small town that he was passing through. And he's like, all right, whatever. Like, I'll take the money. Then I don't have to like scrounge for work when I first get to Minneapolis. These white guys like Indians to come work with them because they say like, oh, like you're good at working outside and you don't get cold, which like gross, but good for him for being like, okay, you want to exploit me? I'll exploit you right back. But he's like at a bar, like a dive bar at night.
Right.
And it's without even explicitly saying so, the tension between all of the drunk white guys,
right,
and like maybe two Indians, American Indians,
right,
is like palpable reading this very short chapter.
Right.
And that scared the crap out of me.
Right, because this is like something that could happen in without any type of supernatural like elements or anything like that. Like this is hate crimes. These are things that you would expect to like see in America, unfortunately. Yeah,
and especially, I mean, there is a whole side path we don't need to get down with like missing and murdered Indigenous women, but like
right.
It's these people, these Indigenous Americans, these Native Americans, these American Indians are not only like systematically oppressed, but they are like a huge number of them are victims of hate crimes and
right.
violence. So that felt very real. And like really freaked me out the first time I was reading it, because the tension is so high, and he's just sort of like running through a parking lot at night, and it's cold out, and he's like a little bit drunk. So that was the first thing that really got to me.
Yes. I would say in terms of things that scared me or really took me aback, that part I was like I said, like a cold open of a horror movie. I'm like, okay, this is how we're getting started. Great. I'm in for this is gonna make me feel not so good. I'm ready to be spooked and disturbed. The thing that got me is not that one, but the next kind of chunk of the book where it surrounds Lewis, who Lewis also left the reservation, and he is living with he's married to a white woman named Peta, and he works at the post office with another Native American woman named Shani, who's a Crow Native American. And, you know, it gets like from Ricky's like kind of cold open of just being like the tension, Lewis faces like a different type of tension of like, he is still one of two like Native Americans in this very small like town, but he has a dog.
He's kind of living a good life.
He's living a good life, but he like very much still thinks about being kind of the only Native American person and having a white woman as a wife, and like what does that mean as like a Native American, and really reflecting, because that point in the story, it's like a year later from Ricky's death. So he's like reflecting on the Thanksgiving classic and whatnot. And when he does that, he's like superstitious. So the build up of like, because as the reader, you're kind of waiting for people to be picked off. So the build up of him kind of expecting something bad to happen to him because he like foresees this. And then like him kind of strategizing and creating this accident because he believes that, you know, Shani is the spirit of the elk he murdered, having him set up this very graphic death for Shani. I remember reading it while I was on my lunch, and I went, whoa, there's a lot happening. And I remember coming back out and saying something to you, and you're like, oh, you got to that scene. That startled me. I think that was the scariest part of the book for me, because for all the tension that was happening, like that's not what I was expecting to happen. And things for Lewis go from so very domesticated and happy, like he lets Shani borrow like fantasy books, and you know, he's happily living and like with his wife and stuff like that, and they have like good things going on. And then all of a sudden he gets so paranoid, and then he like causes this downfall and this death of this like of Shani. And then he reflects afterwards, and he's like, I don't know if I actually killed the elk spirit or if I just murdered somebody. And the horror of that was the most terrifying thing to me, because that's, you know, in like horror movies, you think about like The Final Girl or something like that, where they like not saying you have to pitch this as a horror movie, but something to think about is, you know, you root for that hero and they like murder somebody at the end. They never talk about like, well, yeah, you were facing off Michael Myers, you just killed Michael Myers, but you also just killed a person. And like, what if that person was actually innocent and you didn't actually defeat the evil spirit that you're fighting against? What if that evil is living on? That's terrifying to me.
I mean, not to go super deep, because I don't even know if this is like what Stephen Graham Jones was going for. This is just what I took from it. But to me, Lewis's whole section of this book read like sort of like an analogy for intergenerational trauma, and how like that paranoia, like you can talk yourself out of it, but like the stories that you have been taught by your family for generations that they have been taught are so deeply ingrained in you that like when you're straddling two cultures like that, like, yeah, you know, he has this white wife, he works like a pretty like cushy job, in my opinion. He works for the Postal Service.
Yes.
You know, he's got like these like buddies that kind of remind him of his friends back home, but they're all just like crusty old white dudes who work for the post office. And then all of a sudden this like other person who's not even from like the same exact culture as
right.
you, she just knows also what it means to be a Native American.
Right.
Starts working there, and everyone starts lumping you together. It's like microaggression after microaggression.
Right. And then insinuating that he's going to cheat on his white wife with this like Native
right.
American woman.
And even he starts to like, in his head is, I mean, there's times when like they're like playing basketball together at one point, and he like is thinking about like when you box someone out with like your butt, and that's like the best way to get the ball away from someone. And then he's like thinking about Shaney's butt. Never mind. Baseball. Like think of anything else, because she's like an attractive woman. So it's like now he's like doubting himself on natural things. Like everyone is attracted to people. It's just whether or not you act on it that
right.
means anything. But he's like, so it's got it in his head that like, oh, well, they're like going to be together. Keep sitting them in the corner.
Right.
Oh, when's his wife going to leave him?
Right.
She's not even going to let him hang his Indian stuff on the wall. And so like, it, to me, that's what it read as, is like this whole deep-seated paranoia that then keeps growing, and the self-doubt that keeps growing into this essentially like almost like a mania.
Right. It is like a that's the terrifying point, because I'm like, here's the thing. If there's no supernatural elements to it, like each of these deaths that we've just discussed could actually happen in real life.
Yeah, which is also, I think, probably what he was going for, which is like, well, from the outside perspective, based on stereotypes, it's like, oh, well, of course he went crazy and killed people. He's to use a really outdated, horrible term, he's off the reservation.
Right.
Like, you know, implying that, you know, Native Americans are less than human when you take them out of their element. And so that's how I took it, was it was about like, you know, these atrocities in the past, and how whether you recognize it or not, it's going to affect you, and it's going to affect future generations. So that was how I took Lewis's whole section. The one thing I liked about Lewis's section, though, was that he like sort of thinks in like headlines often. Like he rephrases a situation to himself as a headline. And so like the baseball one really got me.
Yeah, I think to me those are like the two kind of spookiest parts of the book. I think after you read the stuff with Shaney, I after I read that, I was mentally prepared for like kind of the rest of the story.
It's sort of a slow build from Ricky through Lewis, and then it kind of picks up the pace for the ending as we go through the other guys. But the part that scared me the most from Lewis's section was he's asleep one night, and he hears something coming up the stairs, and it's like not a normal footfall pattern. Like it doesn't actually sound like the way his wife walks up the stairs, and to him it's like a clop and like a dragging sound.
Yeah.
And so he starts to convince himself that it's like a deer coming up the stairs. Right. And like that I think was the scariest part of his section for me, because it's like, I don't know if it's like why I can listen to murder stories and fall asleep, but if I watch a ghost movie, I have to sleep with the lights on and I have terrible nightmares. It's like, oh, well, like murder I can rationalize, but like paranormal spirits I can't. How am I gonna like rationalize with a ghost, like, you know? So I don't know. That was the scariest part for me. The part with Harley the Malamute outside hits me the hardest. He comes home at one point because Harley has been like jumping the fence, and he wants to show all of his friends because Harley's like an older dog, and he's like, wow, like what, he just started doing this, it's so weird. Right. Like an old dog learned a new trick that's dangerous because we live by train tracks. And they get there, and Harley has like accidentally hung himself essentially off like a clothesline that he was tied to in the fence. This isn't a spoiler, he lives through that, but That part's really hard for me to read because my dog that I had, she was a Jack Russell Terrier, essentially did that to herself in my house while I was gone one day.
God.
And in the most Brita fashion, I was at a local Oktoberfest. I ran a race in the morning and then got free entry to the Oktoberfest. And while I was at the Oktoberfest, I saw my ex and the girl that he cheated on me with.
Spilling some tea in the podcast.
And so he's never going to find this. I don't care. We don't talk. So I saw them and I was just like, oh man, I'm miserable. I don't want to be here because I don't want to run into them. I'm just leaving. And I went home, and thank God I did, because when I went home, my dog, she was like older. She lived to be 19. She was like Methuselah old. But she was like still in pretty good spirits and like health until the end. Like she was mostly blind. She was a little bit deaf, but she would still go out and like run laps around the backyard. So we're like, all right, she's fine. But because she couldn't see, she walked into like the hanging strap of a tote bag that was hanging off of a kitchen chair and then couldn't get out and twisted it around her neck so tight that she couldn't move.
Oh, baby.
And then she was panicking, so she was pulling on it, but she's so small that it wouldn't pull the chair over. So she was like hanging herself. And I don't know how long she was like that before I got home. But yeah, I like kind of lived through that, so I didn't love it. She was like still very active and like when I got in the house, so it wasn't quite as traumatic as like when they find Harley, but it was still pretty awful. And she lived for like another 2 years after that, so she was okay, but it was a close call.
Whew. Oh, yeah. So anyways, like I said, if you don't like dog trauma, this one does have heavy dog trauma in it, so that might be a turnoff for you.
Moving on from that section, the format of the book is essentially 3 larger sections with individual titles for each chapter within. So there's the section about Ricky at the beginning, then there's the house that ran red, which is Lewis's section, then there's Sweat Lodge Massacre, which is Gabe and Cassidy's section,
right?
And then the last section is It Came from the Res.
I will say with Gabe and Cassidy section, Cass and Gabe are still friends, but Gabe kind of does not have his life together and Cass does. And Gabe is like still heavily drinks, and
I think Cassidy only like sort of recently has his life together.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
It you know, he's like sort of at the beginning of a fresh start, and Gabe hasn't quite made it to that point yet.
With Cass, like he is trying to like essentially keep his life together. And I guess what I appreciated about this is you did get more of a backstory of kind of the Thanksgiving classic and whatnot by this point. And you get it with Lewis's chapter too, because you have Lewis questioning like part of the reason why they remember this Thanksgiving classic is you find out that they are like the 4 of them went hunting for elk, which is a tradition that they normally do. However, they went hunting on elder land in the reserve, and that was something that they're not allowed to do. And then they killed too many elk, and they were not properly using the elk, and they also got caught being on this land that they weren't supposed to be on, so they have to discard all the meat that they had just trimmed up and stuff like that. And then they did talk about giving the meat away, but they don't know if the meat was actually ever ate by any of the
So the first time I read this, I didn't catch it, but on this pass through, it does sort of explain what triggers all of this with that. I mean, so I'm not going to say it's a common practice, but in a lot of indigenous culture and a lot of cultures that are very tied to like the earth and their animals and their connection to nature, while you hunt as part of your culture, it's like a cycle of life kind of thing. So you are respectful to the animals that you kill. You thank them for giving themselves up so that you can continue to live. And in a lot of cultures, they make sure to use like every part of that animal.
Right. That is something I would say, especially environmentally looking at, like the environmental stewardship aspect of it is like, it is very common in white culture. Like we have these giant tournaments and like fishing tournaments of like, what's the biggest fish you can catch? What's the biggest shark you can catch? Like we're killing all of these sharks that don't need to be killed because they're really endangered. And for bragging rights, we're not even eating the fish. We're literally like cutting it up and throwing it away.
Or you're getting it taxidermied and stuck on your wall or something like that.
Right. And same thing with like hunting. Like you have white people that go and kill like bison and stuff like that, and like go exotic animal hunting in like Africa for elephant and stuff like that.
It's the difference between hunting for sustenance and trophy hunting.
Yes.
So this is a hunting for sustenance situation. And there's a part where Lewis describes like sort of like handing out all of this meat from one particular elk to all of the elders. He's like, it was elder land anyway, so like the meat still went where it was supposed to go, so like we're fine. And then he speculates that like, well, it's been 10 years. I guess it's possible that like, you know, somebody could have had it like in the bottom of their freezer. They were so old, like, you know, they couldn't pry it out of like the freezer burn on the side of the freezer. And like maybe that last elder that had been around is like they died, and then their kids were cleaning out the house and they cleaned out the freezer and like chucked that piece of meat or something. And then in like the later chapters, I think it's on page 168, Gabe is talking about being at his dad's house, because I think he goes there to get a gun because he wants to like, he doesn't have the cash to do this sweat, so he wants to trade a gun for it instead. He, in this whole time, has still been like hunting elk. He's just like, whatever,
right.
You can't tell me shit. I'm gonna do what I want. And he says like, you know, he's probably taken like twice as many elk as they popped that day. But he says, well, enough that when he was stashing some of the meat in his dad's freezer in the garage a few months ago, it was that little one horn that had still been in velvet. He had to make room by cleaning all the old stuff frozen to the walls of that freezer. So like, essentially, I think Gabe had like some of that meat in his dad's freezer, didn't remember that that's what it was from, tossed it, and sort of set all of this in motion.
Good job, Gabe. So yeah, back to like the sweat lodge. So yeah, we had the latter half of the book is kind of set at the reservation, as they're still living on reservation land, and there is a small interlude with the you do get the perspective of the elk that is essentially taking revenge upon the four characters. And that's really a tonal shift in the book. And I think there's a lot of people that like that type of tonal shift, and there's a lot of people that didn't. I almost liked it better when I didn't have that perspective, because it's like in Scooby-Doo, when you find out the monster's really like somebody else. It's scarier when...
It's always scarier when you don't know what the monster is.
Yes.
When you can't see it.
But again, this book's not really about... It's not really about like them being killed. It's about kind of their lives and like looking back and stuff like that. Like, it's not... The horror is not them being picked off one by one. It's kind of like dealing with the atrocities of... what they deal with, like, as Native American people in modern America. Like, as I said, the way Ricky was killed, he could have been killed like that in real life by white people. And, you know, and then people assume, oh, what did he do to kind of get that to happen to him? They never assume, that.
They don't dig very deep. They sort of just slap a surface level label on it based on stereotypes and prejudices, and that's it. Let's go home. Pack it in, boys.
Right. So, this is why it's a really well reviewed book, and this is why, like, I would tell people to read this, because it fits on multiple levels and themes.
It is tense. It does have some really horrific descriptions
and gore.
It is very gory. is scary. I mean, there are several moments that I found very scary. But yeah, like there is a lot of like deeper, there's a lot of meat to this one. There's a lot of deeper elements here that I think work really well. They kind of, during the whole sweat lodge thing, it is another one of those questioning, like, what does it mean? Like, are we Indian enough? Are we like, yeah, we're doing this traditional thing, but we're kind of like modernizing it. And like, what does that mean?
They kind of like half-ass it, right? Like when they build their sweat lodge, like it's made out of like old laundry and stuff like that.
It's like blankets his dogs have been sleeping on, like Cassidy's dogs have been sleeping on, and like at one point he's like, did you wet these, right? So that like the embers don't go up. He's like, no, they would have smelled like wet dog. And he's like, wait a minute, does dog hair burn? So they're like kind of half-assing it, but they're doing it essentially to get cash from one of the reservation police. He wants his son to participate in this because the ritual of a sweat is kind of like a spiritual cleansing. Like, you go into this space, you go in naked, there's usually singing and drumming. There are hot stones that you pour water on to make essentially like a steam room, like a sauna, and you sweat it out in there. And they make a big point of telling this like teenager that like, it's not about who's toughest, like you're not supposed to pass out, man. If you need to get like, if you feel like you can't breathe, get down on the ground because the cold air is at the bottom. Like, don't be a tough guy. But like, your dad's doing this because he does not want you to end up like a stereotype and a statistic. Like, you got to get your life together. You're a teenager. Right. And his dad is like, these guys used to be you, and look how messed up their lives are. Like, don't go down this road. So they're essentially like agreeing to this sweat because they just want to get like $100 off of this guy.
Right. We also meet Gabe's daughter, who is described, and Gabe's daughter is he doesn't see her very often, and she is a like very good basketball player, and she's such a good basketball player that they're like, this is how she's going to essentially get away from the reservation and to like make the most out of her life. Like, she'll get a college scholarship on her basketball. And her mom and stepdad, who is the game warden, are trying to kind of get her away from Gabe because he's not a good influence.
Yeah, he's essentially getting money to gamble so that he can like double what he's got. It's him, maybe it was Cassidy. One of them is like talking about how like, oh, well, if I had like an extra $40, like, a couple weeks ago, that just would have went straight to beer. But like, no, I'm like investing it now in this other thing. I think it is Gabe, because I think he's like saying that he bet like money on, is it Denora?
Yeah, he's betting money on his daughter's basketball game.
So, and there is like this really terrible stereotype that is like, there is a high instance of alcoholism in Native Americans, but that's not to say that like they are just meant to be alcoholics. It is because of situations that we white people have put them in. Right. I mean, reservation life it's got its pros, but it's also got a lot of cons, and that is nothing of their doing. It's us. It's oppression is what it is.
Yes.
So I don't like saying that like he's got alcohol problems, but like he does, because I don't want to. Right. I don't want to say a stereotype, but it is a stereotype.
That is how that character is written.
So, yeah, and like Cass, on the other hand, has been trying to save money for him and his new girlfriend.
Right. He has ambitions to get married, and anyways.
And they have a whole thing essentially about like, well, she's more Indian than me. She's also Crow, and he's Blackfeet. And they talk about like, well, we ride, our horses on the land of our ancestors. So like, we got to run our horses out tomorrow, and like, we keep dogs, and we live on the land in a trailer. And I got this sweat going now, so we can like use it all the time. And like, maybe the two of us can go in there together, but like not tonight, because that's like not how it goes. Like, it's just men together doing the sweat. She's not invited. So there is that whole other cultural element with his story as well, of like what it means to be, his identity, his social identity, his cultural identity. So
so things go off the rails at the sweat. And because we now have the perspective of the elk who does change from like an elk spirit to a woman.
And when I was rereading this, one of the like the chapters that's told from the elk's perspective talks about being found like on the side of the road, essentially after like an accident, and a family taking her wrapped in a blanket like in the car,
right, and
describes like this moody teenager in the back being like, what are you?
Mm-hmm.
And then that, am I right in saying that that's Nate and Victor who picked him up with his wife and like a baby or something?
I feel like yes,
because I think the elk says something along the lines of like, it's not the same car that I came to the reservation in, but it's the same father and son.
Yes.
Okay.
I
think I missed
correct.
that on the first time as well.
So Nate and Victor is of course the teenager that's in the sweat. Nate is
opposite. Victor's the dad.
Victor's the dad.
Nate's
Nate is
kid.
yes. So yes, anyways, they have this sweat. It does not go well. They walk out of the sweat and they start getting picked off one by one.
More dog deaths.
There is Gabe runs in to grab a...
I think that was the other thing about Gabe with the meat is he fed it to dogs to get rid of it. He didn't just throw it in the trash. He gave it to the res dogs.
Oh, God, Gabe, you have one job, buddy.
Sorry, that was like very back and forth, but it just dinged right back into my brain.
So yeah, it goes off the rails very quickly, and this part of the story goes pretty fast. So I would say if you may take multiple readings to go through it because you might miss stuff on the first try because you're just like, wait, what is happening?
Yeah, there's also that whole thing when we were talking about them like half-assing the sweat. Cassidy keeps going like, man, we should have drum. I got some tapes. Should I go get the tape and play it? No, never mind. Don't worry about it. And then like Victor, who's outside adding like it's his job to stay even though his kid's inside, to add more hot rocks to the tent without them having to come out and leave it open. And he starts playing like a drum circle tape from like his police truck. And then it cuts out at one point while they're inside, which was like, I just think about when you go like camping or something and your friends are playing a boombox or a CD player. Wow, I'm old. They're playing music from Spotify on their phones. And all of a sudden it cuts off and like you can't see, like maybe you're in the tent and it's outside or something. Like that's a very scary moment and they're just waiting for the tape to pick up again.
Right.
So good atmosphere. Good job, Stephen Graham Jones.
So it does kind of going from there, like there are guns, obviously Gabe brings a gun to this. So there's some shooting involved, and some miscommunication, which that actually a couple of the deaths that occur in this happen because there's like miscommunication of they think that they're shooting at this elk spirit, but they're actually shooting at like people they love and care about. And Denora finally comes back to essentially, she knows her dad's been betting on her. She wins like the game and she comes to collect because he was going to give her some of the money, or she comes to give like the money.
Yeah.
And so she kind of comes to this scene of violence and whatnot. And then one of the odder moments of this book, and I get why it happened, but it's still an odd moment, is she has a basketball game with the elk spirit.
I love it.
You love it?
I love it.
It feels odd juxtaposed to the rest of what just happened.
So here's why I love it. Because during the sweat, they talk about this like teenager doesn't want to do this, and so they're like telling him like, no man, like your dad's doing this for you, and like, you know, like this is the stuff that becomes like the tales that like we tell around campfires. Like,
right.
your dad is gonna do whatever it takes to keep you on the right track. He's gonna keep putting every rock he finds, and when he runs out, he's gonna like call to a hawk to bring him some moss or some shit like that. And like, they're talking about this like, you know, like narrative tradition and it being passed out, and like this is the stuff of that kind of folklore and narrative tradition. It is like the devil went down to Georgia and
right.
is playing for your life,
right? And so she does not realize at first that she is playing against the elk spirit. It takes her a few minutes to kind of realize it, and yes, this is like the biggest basketball game of her life because she is playing for her life, for her survival. The one element that we did not discuss and is part of the reason why, so the elk that is kind of taking vengeance upon these 4 Native American men was pregnant. And that part, thinking about it now as a mother, as opposed to when I read it when I was not with child, hits a little bit differently. And it's also, I think, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I too would be chasing after people if I were pregnant, and you know, they didn't just like disregard their all of the elk and not take care of the meat and whatnot, but they also tossed away the calf.
Well, they didn't toss it away. They buried it.
They buried it, but it's still like it was discarded.
But they normally, if they weren't in such sort of like a frenzy during this hunt, would not have shot a pregnant elk, nor would they have shot one so young. Like, there's a whole thing about how she's like much too young to be pregnant, and she probably wouldn't have carried her calf to term anyway. But there's a lot of factors as to why like no one respectfully would have shot this elk.
Right.
And so once they realize that, like, Lewis is like horrified when he realizes this. And so he tries, they have to try to kill this elk essentially 3 different times before she finally dies.
Each is more horrific than the last, and you're being told this and it's not just told in a straightforward kind of way, because you get this stuff in kind of snippets and flashbacks and whatnot. And I would say as the reader, you do understand from her perspective. There's a little bit of a good for you, like, because you're just like, yes, if this is like the reason why, you can understand the vengeance and stuff like that. So
yeah, and I think it's also a little bit of like, you know, because that is tradition and that is, you know, their culture and the culture behind their sustenance hunting, it is kind of like what happens when you try to break with tradition and you try to run away from who you are. Like, it's in you, and it's always going to find you, and it's going to come back, and you're always going to have some sort of like disjuncture in your social identity, because that's how you were raised. So no matter how you try to leave it, like, that's part of you, whether you want it to be or not. Right.
And that, to me, that's culturally and universally across everywhere. Like, there are certain traditions that, and what better way to kind of connect that back to the tradition of like Thanksgiving, for white people. Like, there are certain traditions that you do on Thanksgiving that even after, if you've moved away from your family and stuff, you're still going to participate and do some sort of tradition to kind of carry that on, because it's hard to break away from that. And if you try, you end up feeling some sort of way.
For other holidays, yes, I agree. I don't care about Thanksgiving. I'm sorry if that's your favorite holiday. Sorry, I just hurt your feelings.
Listen, Bob from Bob's Burgers would be so disappointed.
I don't like it. We've talked a lot about what worked. Like, did you have anything that just blatantly didn't work for you?
No, nothing that like blatantly didn't work. This was my very first Stephen Graham Jones book, so while like Stream of Consciousness might work for you, like, it took me a really long time to get into the book and like to appreciate it. It took me a long time to finish this book. I want to say over the course of like a month. Like, I did not fly through this book, and it's not a very big book.
No, 300-ish pages.
I since then have read other books by him, and I think this is probably one of the ones I liked more. But all of his books, like many other horror authors, I appreciate that, like, he settles on an ending. Is it the happiest of ending? No. And I just finished another one. It's an audiobook, like, exclusive, called The Babysitter Lives. At the end, or The Babysitter Lives, and I'm like, I was expecting this book to go a certain way and end a certain way, and then there's a little twisty twist that just completely takes me for a loop, unfortunately, but it is a good book. So there's nothing, I would say, if stream of consciousness style is not your thing, give it a chance before you're, like, completely blowing it off.
It's also less stream of conscious. Night of the Mannequins is much more that stream of consciousness type of writing because it's told from first person perspective. So this is not like that. So if that puts you off, don't be afraid to read this one.
Right. And it has definitely less references to things than, like, My Heart is a Chainsaw, which is just his big love letter to, like, 70s and 80s giallo and slasher movies. So if, that's another one I would say you read that after this book.
It is, like, the dumbest thing, but it made me so mad, is Gabe, when he meets up with Denora. It's, like, from Denora's perspective, and she's just kind of, like, I think she's just shooting hoops by herself. And it says, "Hey, finals girl," an unhilarious male voice called out from behind her moments after a truck engines had been turned off. Finals girl. It's what her real dad calls her when she's on the court. Finals girl is entirely too close to final girl. I get that it's finals like basketball, but I was like, there's no way that this was not what you were going for, and I'm annoyed.
Did you catch that the first time through or through the second pass?
The second.
Okay. Because I would say for first time, I didn't catch that first time because I was like, oh, okay.
It's also been a really long time since I read it the first time, so I might have just repressed it because I got, like, irrationally angry about it. The other thing is it's not anything on Stephen Graham Jones or his writing. It is purely just the way my brain works. But when Gabe originally, like, cut up the meat and packaged it, like, they wrap it in paper and they usually stamp it for, like, the cut of what it is.
Right.
But he didn't have his stamps because he was not, like, in his element. He was kind of rushing to do this. So he had to borrow someone's little sister's stamps, and they were all animal stamps. And the only one that wasn't, like, a butterfly or a kitten was a raccoon. So all of the meat he's giving to people is stamped with a picture of a raccoon, which all I could think of was Always Sunny. When Dee and Charlie think that they ate human meat.
Oh, God.
Because they ate it out of Frank's weird meat fridge.
Yes.
And he's like, that, what you have consumed, is human meat. And then they're like, oh my God, I gotta get a taste of it again. Is it racist if I only want to eat, like, a white guy? No, because I don't like dark meat. I like light meat. And, like, it's this whole thing. And he's like, that wasn't human meat. That was raccoon meat. It's probably riddled with parasites. You guys probably got, like, a tube worm or something. That's why you're so hungry. But, like, that's all I could think of with this, like, raccoon stamped meat was the stupid other entirely unconnected storyline from something else because my brain is broken. And then the last thing that bothered me.
That's something that bothered you, but it's just a you thing.
It's just me. It has nothing, like, I mean, I'm just saying this because I know I'm not the only person who thinks like this. And it's like, my guy, why couldn't you get a Sharpie and just write something on it? Like, why did you have to stamp it? So I don't know. I mean, I get that it's a plot point of, like, well, maybe they didn't eat it because they thought it was raccoon meat.
Right.
But also, like, I bought the whole storyline of old people not being able to scrape stuff out of their freezer. You could have just left it at that. But then the other thing that bothered me is, like, on a similar note, is that Lewis's full name is Lewis A. Clark.
Oh, that's a fair thing to be a little
and they're
miffed
like,
about.
it's a joke. His parents made a joke with his name, and I'm like,
that's not nice.
Yikes. I mean, it's your story and it's your people you're telling a story about. So I guess if it doesn't bother you, it's fine. But it bothered me. It's very hokey. And like they go through all of this about Cassidy constantly changing his name. But like Lewis has never once been like, how do I get away from Lewis and Clark?
Nope. Never once was something on his radar.
And they like hint at it before you finally find it out. Like somebody's like, wait, that's your name? Like for real?
Aww.
And then later somebody calls him like Merriweather. And they're like, oh yeah, his name's Lewis A. Clark. So annoying. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think whether you have any knowledge of like the cultural history of Native Americans, or you have zero knowledge and maybe like you've only ever seen Disney's Pocahontas, which is, sorry to spoil it for you, not a great reference point.
No,
I think that you can enjoy this as a horror fan. I think that maybe it would be a service to yourself to Google as your friend, look up some of the things that they reference. Like they talk about like Lewis's graduation blanket, which in passing just sounds like a blanket you got for your graduation, but
right.
Blanket ceremonies are like a huge thing in this culture. So, you know, you can learn a lot. You can educate yourself. You can have your shooting star do moment.
We have
in
one
addition
of those
to this
every week here.
It's true. Constantly learning. That's who I am.
I definitely agree with all of that. It is a very solid horror novel to read, and it is set during kind of the late autumn, so it does feel very autumnal.
It's like right around Thanksgiving.
It's right around Thanksgiving. So it's like just perfect to read this time of year. Stephen Graham Jones, this book really kind of took him to, I would say, kind of new heights as a horror author, because he was only really writing short stories before that, and now he's kind of like, I would say, a household name in terms of horror authors.
The inside of this book jacket calls him the Jordan Peele of horror literature.
Oh,
so
I like that.
That's kind of cool. He has a book coming out next year.
He does. Oh, Jordan Peele.
No. Stephen Graham Jones.
Okay. Is it still
it's
part
like
of his...
I was a teenage slasher.
Oh, I think it's still part of the... Is it still part of his trilogy?
It might be.
Okay. I did like reading this, that the idea for this began to develop when him and his wife were renting a home in Gun Barrel, Colorado, and that the genesis of the book may have been from an event of his childhood where his uncle stopped him from hunting a mother grizzly bear. He also noted that the novel was somewhat of his departure from normal writings, which, yes, that feels right, a process that he's enjoyed, and the book came in 3 parts. And he found writing on the hunting was the biggest challenge, as he can fake it on cars and fake it on people, but I have to get it right for the hunters.
And this year, like 2023, has been the year of Indigenous Native American like horror books coming out, especially in the fall. So maybe we can, midweek after this episode post, do a little roundup of book suggestions for everyone in case they want to read more, and then we can maybe find some more info about Stephen Graham Jones's book that's coming out next year and add it to that. So that's our homework, I guess.
All right. So we just want to say thank you for coming on this journey with us. It now really does feel like it's been a journey. We are still tweaking our book format, and so we will let you know what we're reading, if you want to read along, or if you have any suggestions of things you are going to be reading for the merry season, or Britta's least favorite, let us know.
I just wanted to do like a baby Grinch, like I hate Christmas thing, but
or you can do what my tater tot did, which is like my favorite video I've ever recorded.
Fight me.
No, I'm like, Merry Christmas. 9 months old at the time, and he goes,
I remember this because I was like, that guy and I are going to be friends.
So yes, I just want to say thank you again. And I want to say thank you to Stephen Graham Jones for just existing and being a awesome horror author. And I'm glad that we get to discuss and share this book with you guys, with our dear listeners. And we hope that you enjoy it as much as we did, and that, tell your friends and stuff like that. And if you have anything you want to add that you're like, Beth and Britta, you didn't talk about this major plot point at all. Why didn't you say something? Or why didn't you talk about this like really gory instance? Let us know. Tell us in comments or message us or, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's because we're full of some kind of leftover food, because we're in that weird space of like, oh no, we've recorded in the past and we posted in the future. Thanksgiving happened already, or did it? I don't know. So yeah, if you celebrate Thanksgiving, I hope you had a good day. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, I hope you had a good Thursday.
Yeah, and
maybe you saw me fighting with my family at a restaurant in public. I don't know. We'll see. Jury's still out.
I'm just hoping for a very average holiday, mostly because since 2018, I have had a lot of things happen with my family that that's all we're hoping for. It's just like, are we sitting down to dinner? Everyone's eating. Nobody's hospitalized. Nobody is injured in any major way. Okay. Good. That's a success in our book.
I just want to watch some giant balloons and like some dogs. That's what I think I did on Thanksgiving.
Very fair. There's a Bluey. There is a Bluey float this year.
What?
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
I definitely put on an adult diaper and drove to New York and stole that balloon. So yes, this is the same person you saw on national television who was a grown adult who tried to wrestle away the ropes from 30 balloon controllers on a street in Manhattan.
You know about like,
please send me bail money.
There's like, I don't know. I didn't know about this. I don't remember it, but I think it's a Barney balloon from the parade got away, and it's like people are holding it and they're like flying up, and I think it was like in the late 90s. I want to say 96, 97, and I watched a video of it. I was like, this is amazing.
I just remember the episode of Friends where they find out that Underdog got away and they all run out of the apartment to go watch it. And I think it's like Monica yells like, got the keys? And Rachel thinks that she means like, I've got the keys. So they lock themselves out while all the food's cooking and like the apartment catches on fire. So I'm like Chandler, who does not like Thanksgiving. But that's like me from November 1st until like March 17th for every holiday that happens.
That's fair. So yeah, anyways, we hope that you guys have a good beginning of a new holiday season. And yeah, you can catch us on all where you can listen to podcasts, because now we're available.
We're also on Facebook now, if you're a fellow old.
At the Lake Erie Library.
I think it's Lake Erie Library Pod.
Stop it!
It wouldn't let me do Lake Erie Library when I set it up. If you search Lake Erie Library, it'll come up. It's the same logo. You'll find it. I believe in you. You can do big things. But they made me change the actual like username. So
one of these days I will get all of our socials and everything straight, but today is not that day. Anyways, guys, we hope that you've enjoyed it, and as always, stay spooky, friends.